Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Diane Hayden, and you are listening to the Dr. Diane Show. Stay with us for the next half hour where we explore revolutionary expansion of mind, body, and soul. Each time on the Dr. Diane Show, we have experts from around the country discussing cutting edge topics on longevity, medicine, natural health, mindset, and soul purpose to help you shift your perspective and become a mindset warrior like me. I'm happy to be joined today by Lynda Mettler, certified life coach, Reiki master, and owner of Channeling Your Wisdom Coaching, which provides transformational life coaching to individuals and groups. In addition to coaching, Lynda trains coaches and other professionals in a deep listening technique she calls NICE or NICE, which she'll be speaking on at the International Coaching Federation's annual conference this summer in Orlando. Lynda serves on the boards of the Coaching Federation's Connecticut chapter and the Milford United Way. In her spare time, she hosts meditation circles and is an avid golfer. And you can learn more about her at www.yourwisdomcoaching.com. So welcome, Lynda. How are you today?
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Diane.
Awesome, awesome. So I typically like to start these with finding out a little bit more about your journey and what inspired you to become a coach and start your business.
So I love telling this story. I've told it so many times, and I always wanted to help people. That was just part of who I was as a kid, even. But in my career, I never really found the right fit for that. So I had these corporate careers in marketing and advertising, and I was successful by all accounts. But it just never felt like the work that I was meant to be doing. And in the meantime, to try and find that work, I went to school for psychology and sociology. I pursued a master's in social work. I volunteered like crazy as a grief counselor and a guardian ad litem, all different things in the helping fields to try to answer that question. But what led me to it really was I was, a few years ago, I had gone for my Reiki master certification, and I had come home from that weekend and I was meditating the next day, which Reiki really helped me do in a deep way. And in an instant, I could see how my job, which was in public radio, and I loved it, but it just still wasn't quite the fit. I could feel how that was hurting me, doing work that really wasn't right for me. And I could see how it's hurting my relationships with my family and so forth, and how it was really hurting my soul. And so I knew I needed to make a change. That was it. I'd always wanted to make a change, but that was like, this is no longer a desire. This is an absolute critical must. So um, I started to really think about what that would look like. And that week, I was flipping through some holistic magazines, Nutmeg among them, and I came across an ad for a coaching course that was different than any I'd seen before, called Coaching with Spirit. And what I loved about it was that it was a very whole person approach. It wasn't unlike other coaching that I've looked into. It wasn't just a different way of thinking or somebody else's, you know, patterned approach or just trying to solve a problem. It was addressing the whole person. So that's really what brought me here.
That's amazing. Yeah. And thank you for that plug for the magazine. It's so amazing when I hear that, the magazine has helped practitioners as well as readers. And so many of them do read the magazine. And it's great that it led you to where you are now. So I love that. And I think it's, like there's a lot of us, I think, that have had something happen to us, whether, it's some trauma or some change or whatever that have kind of led us down the road to, oh, this is what we're supposed to be doing now. And we have this realization that while, we had one career and that was kind of like the first chapter, and now we're moving into something else. Um, so let's talk about that a little bit. Tell me what your method of coaching is.
It's different than other types of coaching. It's my own brand, but I combine parts work with meditation, Reiki energy, and life coaching.
Okay, so I think the first question people are going to be thinking is, what's parts work?
Right, it's a good question. And So parts work is actually it's an approach to psychotherapy called internal family systems, or IFS. It's been adapted for coaching because it's a whole person, it's a person-centered approach, not a problem or diagnosis-centered approach. It doesn't focus on what's wrong. It really focuses on who that person is from a systems perspective. And I'll get into that in just a minute. Um, but what parts work does, I'm going to call it parts work, but it's internal family systems. And what it does is it offers a deep dive into the client's inner world, where they can discover new insights, um, and build a new relationship within themselves, relate to themselves in a different way than they do right now. And I'll explain that in a little bit. But it allows people to heal old wounds. And that's one of the primary differences between this work and others. It's not just going back and revisiting, or it's not going back and reliving pain. It's going back and actually revisiting it from the outside in. So you have an opportunity to heal. And it provides, it helps break the negative thought patterns and behaviors that we find even with a new perspective, even with a new mindset or a new idea, we keep finding creeping back up into our lives. So, as I said, IFS, or parts work, is systems thinking. We view the inner world as a system of what we call parts and self. Self is who we are at the core, and parts protect the system. So, if it's okay with you, I'd like to just share a quick image to make this a little clearer.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I think that the analytical people will love this. So yeah, show us an image.
Great. So, you can see that, I hope?
Yep, clear.
Okay, great. So this is the structure of the system through the lens of IFS, or parts work. Well, parts work is the actual work. IFS is the approach. Um, so when we're born, we are pure and undamaged, if you want to call it that, basically. With the exception of what we call legacy burdens, which are things that could be passed down, or we have other words for those. Generational trauma and things like that. But for the most part, we are basically undamaged and whole. And as part of that, at our core, our access to these great 8C words, which is very well known in the parts work world. So our calmness, our sense of confidence, our clarity, creativity, and curiosity, our natural courage, compassion for ourselves and for others, and our ability to connect. There are a number of other words that over the years I've found also apply, like natural charisma and others, but I'm not going to go down that road because I could be on that for a while. But that's who we still are. Those are all in us. That's who we are at our core. And what happens in youth, childhood, and adolescence, is we experience, all of us, pain, shame, guilt, grief, or fear. Sometimes they're just normal parts of, childhood. I did something wrong. I got punished for the first time. I'm not used to my parents yelling at me. I answered wrong in class and I felt ashamed, or, a coach reprimanded me. Sometimes those things happen to everyone, and that's normal. And we develop some protections around ourselves to be able to cope with those feelings of pain and shame. They're uncomfortable. But often, um, especially if we endure this over a long period of time, a prolonged period of time, the response to this becomes this protector that can take over and kind of run the show. So the pain part, or that shame part, that young part, is what we call an exile. We push that out of the system because we don't want to feel it anymore. We get very good at pushing down feelings when they're too much. And so we call those exiles. They're pushed away. And what comes to replace that are these protector parts, these parts that, and they're more than just these, but these are some of the ones that a lot of people can relate to. And they start to take over. They start to run our show. So for me, I had an analytical part that was running my show, and a helper part that was also running my show. And I'll explain why in a minute. But people will respond to these. Some may say, yes, I recognize maybe my perfectionist, it manifests extremely like OCD, right? Or my taskmaster. I had a client I worked with whose taskmaster kept her working all the time. She no matter what she was working on, it told her she wasn't working hard enough, and then it gave her three more projects that she had to go do, and she was just never doing enough.
And you
The
can
inner
be more
critic,
than one, right?
you can have, oh, this, and this is not how we are. These are parts that can take over our thinking.
Right.
Thank you for asking.
And there can be
Exactly.
more than one. Yep. Okay.
Many of them.
Yep.
Often we all have some familiarity with the inner critic, right? And I don't know a single person who says they like their inner critic, right? It's the
Right.
one that says you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not working hard enough. There's so much enough at the end of it. And it keeps us from taking risks often. Um, so when these parts get in our way, right? So we have indulgent parts that have us running to the refrigerator to make us feel better because some other part is getting active. When you said we have multiple parts, they can be happening at the same time. A part that makes us feel like a victim, that no matter what I do, everybody has it better than I do, that sort of thing, or it's always somebody else's fault. Worriers, I work with a lot of worriers, and I had a worry part too. So yeah, so we can have a lot of these, and they're protecting young parts of us to make sure that we don't get triggered, to make sure we're always safe. So let me close that. So when these parts become out of control, when they take over, I use the analogy of an orchestra. If you imagine that your inner world is like an orchestra, and all of your thoughts and emotions and behaviors are the performers, they're the players, your tuba player, your drummer, and so forth. And when something happens in your world, like let's say you want to go take a flight and the weather's bad, and there's this niggling feeling in the back of your head that says, uh-oh, don't do that, right?
That'd be me.
Okay, so that's your
Perfect
worried
example.
part.
Yep.
Great. So that's your worried part in the back of your mind that's saying, that's kind of like your drummer beating the drum, going, hey, you may not want to do that. And that's normal, and that's healthy, and that's fine. When it becomes a problem is when the worrier takes the podium of the orchestra and it acts as the conductor of all the other parts and says to the part that says, no, 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 we're going to be fine, shut up, and says to some other part that says, you know, we've done this 1,000 times, all of these other voices in your head, and this worried part is so loud that it causes you stress or anxiety, or it even causes you to take an action like canceling your flight.
Mm.
That's when the worrier is at the seat of consciousness, and we can't, or at the conductor's podium, and we can't think around it, kind of thing. And that's when these parts really they start to run the show. And this work is about getting you, that self energy that I showed you with all those great C words, back to the podium and getting your parts back into their rightful places so they're playing harmoniously. That's the goal.
Yeah, I think I have a great example actually about that. This literally just happened to a friend of mine. We were all out for my birthday. Actually, we
Happy birthday.
were. Thank you. We were in a bar and well, a restaurant actually, but they had a DJ come in, so there's some dancing, and we were kind of in this back area, and we were kind of had like this little private room to ourselves. And one of my friends is just the life of the party, bubbly. She's a dancer, like she's out there, whatever. And she started kind of dancing with people who were walking by. We had these two tables, and she just kind of like started jumping in front of people and dancing with them, and kind of like it kind of got to this point where people had to dance in order to pass through our group. And
Oh,
my other friend was getting more and more anxious. And finally, she says to a third person, you know, my other girlfriend looked at her and she's like, what's happening? Like, our friend Chrissy is just having a good time, whatever. And my friend goes, I am freaking out right now because she's going to get punched in the face. I just know it. She's like, I have to get out of here. I'm having a panic attack. And she literally had to leave because she had basically projected all like that inner, that worrier was basically saying to her, someone is going to get into a fight because she's doing something, quote, inappropriate or bothering people or whatever it was.
And that what you're describing is actually parts on both sides. Your friend who was kind of needing to be the center of
Yeah.
attention in that moment also had a part going on. She was
Yeah.
also, right? So yeah, so parts can show up in different ways, and risky behavior or sort of extreme behaviors can be part of that. And that worried part of your friend to the point where she had to leave is also, yeah. So those are great examples. Thanks for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's so fascinating to me. And like I said, I really think people who are analytical would love this type of work because just of the way that you kind of break it all down, and it's very, to me, it's very tactical. Like you can, clear, tactical. It's not kind of this, type of work where you're just talking and the therapist is just listening and, you know, and
So I
asks you
want to
questions. Yeah.
You're right, 100% that's true. But it's not, it's funny that you mentioned the analytical part, and I'm going to tell you a bit about my story if that's okay in just a
Yeah,
minute.
sure.
But the analyst is a part, and
Exactly. Yep.
I'm going to explain that to you as well, about my own analytical part. But a lot of my clients, I end up working with them because they have this overly analytical part. So a lot of this work, which I didn't really talk about, is what I call inner journey work. We're doing it oftentimes with the eyes closed and listening to the system. We're connecting with the body to get a sense of where these strong feelings reside, and listening to the part from its perspective. So that analytical part always wants to try and understand. And I'm always having to ask it to kind of take a seat, step aside, give us some room so we can do this work. And it shares um, a little bit kind of something similar to shamanism, in that it's it uses some guided imagery, but it's all guided by the client's system. I don't give any of that to them. They find all of it themselves within themselves, and it's amazing to do and see and witness as they discover parts of them that they never knew. We always think we know ourselves until we start doing this work and realize we have an amazingly loving, protective system that truly wants what's best for us. It's just not always doing the job we want it to do, and we're
Yeah.
not always happy about it.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So there's probably a million reasons for this question, but what was it about this style of coaching that spoke to you?
So, my analytical part ran my show. When I was a teenager, my mom was early teens. My mom was dying of cancer, and I needed to try to make sense of that.
Mm,
And so, in order to make sense of two things, one, why was God taking her away? Right? I just needed to understand that. It didn't make any sense. And the other part was, I needed help. I was the youngest in my family, and everybody was so riddled with grief. Nobody really could be there for me.
yeah.
And so I had to make sense of things. I had to try and understand what was happening, both from a spiritual perspective, but also from um, a logistical one, right? So that I didn't lose faith, and that I didn't hurt all the time, and that I didn't feel left behind. So, in order to cope, some part of me kicked in and said, I'm going to make sense of this. And it found excuses for all the people that weren't showing up the way I needed to them. And they were truly hurting. But I needed to make sense of that, so I didn't feel like a victim. And also, I didn't want to lose faith. So I had decided that, well, God must need my mother in heaven, the thinking of my 13-year-old, more than I need her here. And that helped me make peace, even though there was no proof. It was my logic. It made sense to me. So what ended up happening though, and this is how parts get triggered, right, in us. This is how they become um, somewhat overtaking of our system, is that we begin to rely on them in some way, or they begin to take over because they know that they have to protect us. And so what ended up happening really was that not only did this analytical part um, help me understand the world, but it also became part of my identity. People would come to me and say, I remember in high school, I had some boy I didn't even know come up to me and say, Lynda, I heard you're really good at giving advice. I'm having a hard time at home. And I'm thinking, who is this kid? And it truly became what felt like purposeful for me. How do I give advice, right? I wanted to be useful and purposeful. As I said, I was a helper personality, and this was a way to do that. So not only did this part protect me, but I hung my hat on it as part of my identity. And but as I grew up and I matured and could handle things, when I would experience grief or some other pain, instead of being able to just fully feel that grief, which adults generally can, this analytical part would shut it down. It was uncomfortable. Just gonna reason it out because it become a habit. And so it carried into my adulthood and it got in the way. It really stopped me from being able to connect with people because I didn't trust the universe. I didn't trust that I didn't trust other people fully because this analytical part always had to understand everything. Whether it was real or not, it would make things up to be able to help me cope and show up in the world in an honest way. The problem was it wasn't honest. I couldn't get to the rest of me because it was always in my seat of consciousness. It was running the orchestra and it wasn't very good at it. So when I discovered this work, um, which by the second day of the class that I had signed up for, this Coaching the Spirit, by day 2 of a 4-month program, my in this technique, my analytical part sort of softened back, and all of a sudden I had access to what was a lifetime of emotion that I had been repressing. And it was an exciting feeling. It was a little bit like unnerving at the same time, but I felt so much freer and changed. And that in that moment, I'm like, this is what I am doing. This is it. This is what I'm going to do for other people because this is amazing. Um, and so this work really just helped me understand myself so much better. My analytical part is still part of my system, but now it's got its rightful place. So I use it when I need it in partnership with my self energy, but it doesn't run the show anymore.
Yeah. I mean, so many things about what you just said I can identify with, from, you know, I lost my father at a relatively young age as well. And I remember exactly, I basically felt like, okay, well, that is the biggest heartbreak I'm going to have. Nothing else is ever going to hurt me as much as that's going to hurt me. And that was like a protective thing for me. Instead of it,
Absolutely.
I didn't realize at the time saying that meant like, okay, well, you're going to put a barrier up so that nobody does ever hurt you again.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. And that's such a great protector. These parts are doing such important work for us, but it does exactly that. It prevents you from really being able to fully love because when you fully love, you're vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, you risk pain. And that part doesn't want that for you.
Right.
And the big thing to know is that these parts still see us as those young people. So my analytical part still thought I was 13. And when I was able to update it, that was how I was able to move through that by letting it know I'm an adult now, bringing that self energy to the conversation so we could see I was capable. And it was able to then trust me that somebody else was here and it didn't have to run the orchestra anymore. But I had to update it. It still thought I was a kid. And that's why those parts continue to run the show.
Yeah.
They still think we're young and vulnerable.
Oh, of course. Of course.
Yeah.
I can think of so many situations where you could help people. But to hear it from you, I guess, what are some of the reasons that, your clients seek you out?
Um, well, some of the primary reasons, some people that have heard of parts work and they're looking for someone, a coach who practices parts work. Therapists also practice this work. So it's someone who's looking for something specific in this field, or they've tried other things. They've gone to therapy, they've been in therapy forever, they've tried yoga, they've read every self-help book there is, and they're like, I just need something different, and this feels different. So that's one reason, because you're right, just talking and revisiting and reliving those experiences doesn't have this kind of impact that I found, because I've been in the therapist seat and I haven't had that kind of impact.
Mm.
Um, but also, that feeling of anxiousness and overwhelm, I'm hearing a lot. Um, Feeling stuck, feeling like they just can't get out of their own way, I'm hearing a lot. Struggling with relationships or with ambivalence, which was a problem for me as well. Um, Also people who are looking for a greater sense of purpose. And I try to move out of that purpose, but that's its own thing, because I just feel that we are living our purpose just in what we're doing, what we're talking about, how we're being together. But that's a whole different ball of wax. But transition, for somebody who's looking to transition to a different phase in their life and they're not sure what that should look like, whether it's career or whatever, retirement, marriage. And then if they have a major decision to make, um, to help them. This work is amazing, even for quick, like a one-off session. If someone has a difficult decision and they have a lot of voices in their head, like you're considering moving and you're not sure, and you have a lot of competing thoughts around that, this work is really great at helping you strip out so you can see each one of those concerns one by one, and then come up with the answer from an intuition place, because that's what self energy is. It's our intuition and our inner wisdom.
Yeah,
So those are some of the things.
I think it's important also that, just to get a perspective on your background. I'm glad you uh, mentioned that you're as a coach, and most people I think who are listeners of my show know that coaching is not therapy. Someone who's a certified coach is not doing therapy, and vice versa. So I just think your perspective is interesting because you're coming at this from the perspective of being a coach, not a therapist. So
Right.
people are going to be drawn to you because of that
That's right.
versus someone who might be drawn to therapy.
And I'm glad you brought that up. One of the dimensions of the work that I'm doing is life coaching. So when we start to strip out some of those feelings, and get to sort of the root, then we have an opportunity to strategize how that's going to work in action in your relationships, in your communication, in whatever's coming next for you. So that's where life coaching comes in really handy.
Yeah, and I love that. To me, I mean, I am definitely a future thinker. So, and I'm always very action oriented. So I'm always like, okay, I'm going to work with this person, whether therapy or coach or, whatever I've done in the past. But I just feel like for me, um, I've made the most progress when I've worked with a coach. And I'm
Hmm.
not saying that to take anything away from therapy. I think that therapy has a purpose, and I think that it is critical, for people for different reasons. But in a lot of the situations that I've been in, for me, the coaching I felt worked better just because it gave me that perspective of, taking things apart, but then, okay, how are we going to move forward? So
Right. Yeah.
it's more action oriented to me.
Exactly. No, you're exactly right about that. It does help. It helps with the here and now, and it helps you move forward. Parts work, because of the nature of it, does also allow me the ability to go back and do healing. So while traditional coaching doesn't work with the past, what I like to say, because it's always important that coaches and therapists are staying in their lanes, what I like to say to people is that those wounds, they live in us now. And that's what we're working with. Even though they're carrying stories of the past, they're very much alive in our system. here and now. Um, and therapy, there are times I'll make a referral to a therapist to provide additional support if the client is in a crisis or if there's a diagnosis. But you're right, you're exactly right. The coaching does give us the opportunity to move forward in a way that therapy doesn't focus on.
Yeah. So we just have a couple minutes left. I want to make
Okay.
sure if there's anything that we didn't cover, what is something listeners can take away from this? I mean, to me, that's like, oh my God, there's so much amazing information, but anything else that you didn't say that you think would be important for them to hear?
This is sort of just a nugget that I want to offer. I think that I covered pretty much all the important things in this conversation, but I just want to offer to anybody who's listening to consider thinking about your system as a system of self and parts. And I say that because I don't want to just give you another mindset, right? But when that feeling comes up in you, say it's your worrier, or your taskmaster, or your analytical part, or anger, right? You get triggered and something just makes you fly off the handle, or you feel like a victim. Just remember, try to remember in that moment, that's not you. That's just a part of you. And if you can, see if you can connect with where that part resides in your system. Often we feel it in our bodies, not everybody, but often we do. See if you can feel where that is and listen. Don't be afraid to hear the messages. We're so busy trying to shut these feelings up that we miss what's important here. They have a story. Listen to what they have to say. If you've got something, a pen and paper, write it down. Because the only way out is through. There's no other way to get better or to feel better unless we hear what's really happening. Otherwise, we're just putting the Band-Aid back on.
Yep, absolutely true. I can attest to that for sure. So this has been amazing. Thank you so much, Linda. I want to let everybody know your website again is www.yourwisdomcoaching.com. And any other contact information that you want people to have in terms of getting in touch with you?
Yeah, just they can also email me at linda@yourwisdomcoaching.com, or there's a form on my website. And for anybody who wants to learn more about this, I offer a free half-hour consultation. See if the work is right for them. They can also go on to Psychology Today and look up internal family systems to hear more about it from the clinical perspective. Find a therapist there if they feel that's more appropriate for them, just by using that filter in their search keywords.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all the great info. I appreciate it. And I'm sure people will be checking you out and learning more about you. Again, Linda's website is www.yourwisdomcoaching.com. And thank you all for listening. And thank you, Linda, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Hope everybody has a great week.